Needham kicked off its Unite Against Racism initiative at the Select Board meeting on Tuesday, July 21st. Residents shared experiences regarding racial discrimination in town with town leaders. The session was the first step to improve policies and practices to make Needham an inclusive and diverse town. Here's municipal producer Yu Xiaowin with the details.
The stories shared at the meeting ranged from microaggressions to physical abuses and included procedural biases in schools, law enforcement, and local businesses. For many longtime Needham residents, the incidents were eye-opening.
I had heard that there were incidents of racism in our town, but I always sort of thought of that as a small amount, and that we were I always saw us as a pretty welcoming town.
In early July, a 55-year-old Needham man screamed racist remarks at a group of Newton teens who were protesting for Black Lives Matter outside of Newton City Hall.
These actions must be condemned by our leadership, and the people with these views and behaviors must not be protected. I hope hearing about this story from me tonight that you will ask yourself why you haven't heard about this ugly incident, where the man was charged but never named and not arrested.
In 2017, a class placement practice employed by the Needham middle schools for years was exposed by a group of parents of color. The practice had been using a student's perceived race as a primary factor in creating school clusters. The exposure of the practice led to a district-wide equity audit in the school system.
I'm ashamed to admit that prior to hearing their accounts about the class placement process, I'd had 3 kids go through the middle school without even once considering why there weren't more children of color in their clusters. It never occurred to me to second guess or question how the clusters were assembled. I assumed that the administrators in charge had my kids' best interest in mind.
Dr. Alutwin Fayemi, a 13-year Needham resident, had a couple of incidents where people called the police on him because they didn't believe he lived in town. He transferred his daughter to a private school after 7th grade because she frequently experienced racial biases.
I can tell you that several times a year in this town, I'll have an interaction that is extremely unpleasant. And I would say every couple of years, I'll have an interaction that makes me want to move out of Needham.
Beth Pinos is a psychologist consulting with Needham students on issues of equity and diversity.
We hear students talking about some of the things we've heard tonight, like about seeing symbols like swastikas, graffiti on the walls of school or places in town. We hear students talking about being singled out in conversation, whether it be in their classes, in other venues, in or out of the schools, where they're being treated as the sole representative of their race.
Some residents have already taken action. The Lived Experiences Project is a story collection initiative created by a group of Needham residents with expertise in psychology, social work, and anthropology. They have collected 20 stories within a week and a half.
A drive-by car yelling coronavirus at an Asian family walking down the street. Racist slurs towards a multiracial child at a restaurant, a drive-by truck screaming, "Get out of my town," to a Black woman walking home late at night from work. A car was stopped by the police. The driver, who was Caucasian, was not asked to get out of the car. However, the Black passenger was asked to come out and provide ID.
They plan to release the results on a quarterly basis over the next year to encourage town-wide discussions and policies. Many residents have seen identifying the problems as a priority. Human Rights Committee co-chair Jennifer Howard Schroeder suggested making the committee a recognized town body to hear, valid, and act on reports of hate and bias. She also proposed a town-wide equity audit. A few residents mentioned the lack of representation of minorities in town leadership and schools.
We need to make sure that when boards and committees are created or elected nominations are submitted, that we have representation from different groups as a possibility. If we want diversity, we need housing that is affordable for the middle class. The state mandates affordable housing and we meet the minimum required, but we continue to tear down houses to build multi-million-dollar homes.
Education and training were also on the top of the list.
So obviously law enforcement has and should be involved in training, but so should our store owners and store employees in terms of treating people with equity.
We use the excuse that Black history is taught throughout the curriculum. And I can tell you that my children know nothing about slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, civil rights, redlining, and the list goes on. And as long as we continue to ignore the past, we're going to do exactly what we're doing.
After hearing the feedback, the Select Board acknowledged that Needham still has a long way to go to be a truly inclusive town.
I was in Needham High School when Martin Luther King was killed. And that was the first year of the METCO program. And there had, as I say, there were great hopes at that time that we would be in a much better place by now, long before now, than we are today.
But they also thought the prospect is encouraging.
I happened to be appointing people to committees right after the 2016 election, so there were a lot of motivated people then. I hope that this year will be another year that will prompt people to be motivated to step up and serve the town.
To hear more stories and opinions shared during the session, go to needhamchannel.org and watch the July 21st Needham Select Board meeting. For the Needham Channel News, I'm Yu Xiaoyuan.